Chapter 17 Misfits. Reggie, I called, but he was lost in his own world. Would you look at that, he murmured, almost to himself. I've always heard they were myths, but here they are. But how? We don't. Reggie, I said louder, but he kept rambling. Perhaps if they... Before I could finish, Lily strode over, picked him up like a child, and gave him a good shake. That snapped him out of it. My brother is trying to talk to you, she said sharply, putting him down. Looking thoroughly disgruntled, Reggie turned to me. That was rude, he muttered. I chuckled. We need to communicate with them. Can you help? Yes, let me try, he grumbled, throwing a glare at Lily before stepping forward. He began speaking in a strange language. No response. He tried two more. Still nothing, just blank stares and a couple of shrugs. Finally, Reggie threw up his hands. Well, they don't know many languages. Wait, he held up a finger, then vanished in a blink. Wait, where did he go? Lily asked, walking to the spot he'd just been. Keenan shrugged. Yeah, he does that sometimes. Is he coming back? I hope so, but with him, who knows? I was about to suggest a backup plan when Reggie popped back into existence holding a strange stone tablet. Sorry, took me a while to find it, he said. You were only gone for... I started. Yes, he cut me off, glaring again at Lily. He stepped over to the giants, scribbled something on the tablet, and handed it to them. The two males passed it to the female, who studied it, then scribbled something in return. Reggie read it, nodded, and handed the tablet to us. Some old mage made this translator pad. Always thought it was junk. Well, it's useful now, I said. Reggie scoffed. No, it is still mostly useless. But I want it back when you're done. With another glare at Lily, he vanished again. Keenan took the tablet from me and grinned. How hard can it be? He walked towards the giants. 30 minutes later, the only thing we'd learned was that they were a family. Rieger, laughing, took the tablet from a very frustrated Keenan and started writing himself. Keenan returned and muttered, They don't teach this in diplomacy. I laughed. Oh, you mean first contact with creatures from another world? He grinned. When you put it that way, I feel a little better. 10 minutes later, Rieger returned with more progress. They say they were pulled from their world and forced to fight in some realm of rock and fire. Eventually they escaped, or were sent here. They warn us to be cautious of the Red One, he pointed at Keenan. Apparently he resembles their captors. That's why they attacked. He continued, It's a father, his son, the son's maid or wife. The translation isn't exact. She's the only one who can read or write. The father says he'll fight for the big one, he nodded toward Lily. They seem to value strength above all else. They hate the demons, so they could help us. But for now, they're content to stay here and fight for her. I glanced at Keenan. I don't think the dwarves will tolerate them on the mountain. Not after they killed 3 of their men. That's right, we won't, Thulgrim growled from behind us. So what do we do with them? Lily asked. I wouldn't mind them as bodyguards. I rolled my eyes. Lily, that's a terrible idea. She just smiled. Okay, bro, whatever you say. Rieger looked thoughtful. What if we put them in the cave with the troll? You mean Frank? Keenan asked. Yeah, they mentioned losing their tribe. Maybe they could start a new one with Frank. Keenan laughed. Quite the group of outcasts were assembling. I nodded. It could work. It's either a great idea or a terrible one, and I don't have a better idea. Then it's settled for now, Rieger said, assuming they don't kill each other. We decided to take the old path down the mountain to avoid leading the giants through the dwarven city. The other dwarves had already departed to report to the king. And with the storm finally easing, enough to see clearly, we began our descent. By the time we reached the river that led to Grissom, Keenan turned to me. Why haven't we learned how to teleport from the gnome? I laughed. Great question. You can ask him next time. Ugh, Keenan groaned. All this walking is killing me. Rieger smirked. Gotta keep our paladin in shape. Keenan shook his head. We really need to get those horses back. Wait, Lily said suddenly. You guys have horses? I used to love horses. They go great with bread, butter, and cheese. Rieger and Keenan froze, staring at her in horror, until she burst out laughing. Oh, the looks on your faces, she said, doubled over. I chuckled as they glanced at me for reassurance. Don't worry, she doesn't need horses. Lily leaned in close to them, her voice low and playful. But in dragon form, I do sometimes eat humans. Lil, leave him alone, I called out as she skipped over to me, still snickering. What's up, bro? She said with a grin. You're hilarious, you little turd, I muttered, shaking my head. She laughed, and we continued walking. Behind us, Keenan and Rieger exchanged uneasy glances. It was well after dark by the time we arrived at the cave. We guided the frost giants through the entrance, making our way towards Frank's area. Wait, Keenan said, stopping suddenly. We never got their names. Whose names? Lily asked. The giants, he replied. Oh, right, Rieger said. Their names are Thragar, Kaelric, and Silvera. Each time he said a name, the corresponding giant perked up and glanced our way. They grumbled to each other in their own language, crouching to navigate the narrower tunnel sections. Eventually we reached the fork in the tunnel, where Frank stood up. Friends, he called, his crooked tooth grin lighting up his face. I miss you. Philip tells me what you did and how strong you are. The frost giants began speaking rapidly and pointing at Frank. Frank frowned nervously. These new friends? They big. He eyed them cautiously. They'd be hard to bonk, he muttered, gripping his club a little tighter. We hope they're friends, Keenan said, but keep an eye on 'em, Frank. Well, okay, Frank said slowly. But they think I'm stronger than you guys, and I don't think that's true. Wait, what? Keenan blinked. Frank shrugged. They speak giant. You understand them? I asked, surprised. Yes, Frank puffed out his chest. I grew up with giants in the bad place. These giants? I asked. No, stone giants. Rieger sighed. I can't tell if we're the luckiest or unluckiest group in the world. Duh, Lily said, grinning. Obviously the luckiest. I'm here. We just shook our heads as Frank eagerly introduced himself to the frost giants. They seemed thrilled to finally communicate with someone directly. We continued into the living quarters, where Philip was organizing supplies while a handful of kids ran about. He looked up and started to say, Don't worry, boss, Then the frost giants entered. Philip's eyes went wide and his jaw dropped. How? He managed, staring in disbelief. The kids froze mid-step, eyes locked on the towering newcomers. Frank beamed. Philip, they brought us more friends. He the best. He slapped Keenan on the shoulder, nearly knocking him over. Keenan grumbled. You gotta be a dragon, and I get a troll. I chuckled. Lily smirked. I got frost giants. Not helping, I said, shaking my head. They are my bodyguards, she added, still smirking. Rieger grinned. I'm fine with nothing, thanks. We all laughed despite ourselves as the frost giant settled in and Philip slowly returned to his work, still shaking his head in disbelief. We left and headed back into town, agreeing to tell my uncles the truth first thing in the morning. After a night's rest, we woke up early and gathered at the inn. Grog grumbled about needing to be in the kitchen, but eventually we got everyone seated around the table. Rieger and Keenan were grinning like idiots, while I was a bundle of nerves. My uncles looked curious, their expressions expectant as they waited for the important news. I took a deep breath and began. You know you'll always be my uncles no matter what happens, right? Grog squinted at me. Have you been drinking, boy? He asked gruffly. Surprisingly, that made me laugh. No, uncle. He muttered something about too much emotion, but I pressed on. I don't want our relationship to change based on what I'm about to tell you. Grog narrowed his eyes. What is this? Are you turning into an elf or something? Rieger shot him a look, and Grog mumbled an apology. Rieger chuckled, but Throm smacked Grog on the back of the head. Shut up and let the boy finish, Throm said. Grog rubbed his head, but stayed quiet. I took another breath, but for the first time I could remember, I had no idea what to say. I just stared at them, frozen. Grog muttered, Ah, great. His brain stopped working. He'll start drooling now. Throm smacked him again. I glanced at Keenan, silently begging for help. He smiled and said, As much as I'm enjoying this, it's time to rip the bandage off. He turned to the three dwarves and added simply, Halvar is the anvil. The dwarves blinked, confused. Gam asked, He has an anvil? Grog laughed. Is that all? Throm's got one too. Rieger, still chuckling, clarified. No, Halvar is the dragon. You know, the one from the mural. The room fell silent. The dwarves' expressions shifted from amusement to something much more serious. If that's a joke, Throm said slowly, or an attempt at being funny, we don't think it is. I finally found my voice. It's true. Grog squinted at me. Have you been in the southern spices or that western tobacco? Stuff will take you on a trip. No, I said firmly. I am Kasago. Their eyes widened. Gam was the first to speak. How do you know that name? Because it's mine, I replied. But it can't be, Throm muttered. At that moment, Lily walked in. So did you tell them? How'd it go? The dwarf spun to face her, then back to me completely bewildered. I gave a faint smile. This is Lily. I unfroze her yesterday. Throm stood and began pacing. He stopped and stared hard at me. We've raised you from a child. Kasago is over 2,000 years old. Ah, Lily said, plopping into the chair. We're in the denial phase, she added with a smile. Lily, knock it off, I said. Well, she grinned, I told you, just go outside and change. Then we can go through all the phases quickly. She glanced at the dwarves. Although I can see why you're enjoying this. I'm not enjoying this, I said, shaking my head. I just didn't want to shock them too much. She picked up one of our drinks and swirled it in the glass. Oh yeah, this is going so much better, she said sarcastically, then laughed and took a sip. Her eyes lit up. Hey, this is actually pretty good. After finishing the glass, she sighed contentedly. Ah, I haven't had a dwarven mead this good in at least 2,000 years. She glanced at the dwarves, clearly enjoying their stunned silence. They've all cracked, Grog muttered. He grabbed his empty tankard and stared into it. What did I put in here? Keenan smiled. This is going well, don't you think? I shot him a glare, but he just laughed. All right, everyone, he said. Outside, time for a show. We stepped outside and glanced around. It was still early and the streets were quiet, with only a few townsfolk milling about. Taking a deep breath, I said, All right, here we go, and I transformed into my dragon form. Gam and Throm immediately dropped to one knee, heads bowed in reverence. Grog, still clutching his tankard, let it fall to the ground with a dull thud. He shook his head in disbelief and muttered, But we raised you from a child. I was about to respond when a scream pierced the air. A woman stood frozen, pointing at me in horror before bolting down the street, shrieking. I quickly shifted back to my human form. Keenan burst out laughing. I can't believe you just did that right here. Rieger shook his head, clearly exasperated. Yeah, I would have at least gone to a warehouse or something. Moments later, several guards came rushing over, weapons drawn. Jeffries was with them, his expression stern. Where is the creature? He demanded, scanning the area. Gam stepped forward, raising a calming hand. Sorry, lad. We're testing an illusion spell for the upcoming conflict. Didn't mean to alarm anyone. Jeffries looked skeptical, eyes narrowing. Then he relaxed and chuckled. All right, Gam, but you really scared Betty. She ran off screaming. You might want to apologize to her. Of course, Gam replied with a quick nod. I'll take care of it. As Jeffries and the guards moved off, the dwarves crowded around me, peppering me with questions. Lily sauntered over with a smirk. You know I'm just as cool as he is, right? Probably even cooler, and better looking in my dragon and human form. Lil, not here, I said firmly. Too late. With a mischievous grin, she transformed into her dragon form and let out a deafening roar. The town exploded into chaos. Shouts and scrambling footsteps echoed through the streets. Lily shifted back, laughing. See, she said, smiling. Lil, sometimes I wonder what the eldest was thinking when he created you, I muttered, shaking my head. She grinned. You'd be lost and bored without me. Then she strolled back into the inn, leaving us behind to hear Jeffries down the next street, desperately trying to calm the townsfolk. It was an illusion, he called out, clearly struggling to convince the panicked crowd. We all shook our heads, grinning at the poor guard's plight, and headed back inside. Back at the table, the dwarves, now buzzing with excitement, immediately resumed their questioning. So it was you that froze the big one, Throm asked eagerly. I smiled. Yes, although I don't really remember doing it. Must have been some kind of defense mechanism. Throm nodded thoughtfully. The king must know by now, especially with your sister awake. I nodded. He knows. Excellent, Throm beamed. This is great news. Gam leaned in curious. So, when did you find out? We recounted the events of the last couple of days, explaining everything that had happened. My uncles listened intently, hanging on every word. When I finally finished, Throm stood and bowed low. It was an honor to have you in our care, he said solemnly, to keep you safe during your recovery. I hope we've honored you with our actions. If you ever need anything, just ask. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. See, this is exactly what I was worried about. I want our relationship to stay the same. Gam interjected gently. But Halvar, you must understand, for us, this changes everything. As much as we might wish it didn't, we've waited for this moment our entire lives. Keenan chuckled. You've got an entire race of loyal dwarves at your beck and call. He smirked. And I've got Frank. Rieger laughed, while Grog grumbled. Well, I don't care who you are. You'll always be a little pot licker to me. This changes nothing. Except maybe you'll give me more of a fight when we train. That made me laugh, easing the tension in the room. Throm leaned forward with a smile. We'll try to keep things the same as much as we can, but in front of the other dwarfs we'll have to act a little differently. I nodded, smiling warmly. That's all I ask. You're my family, and I wouldn't change that for anything. Throm and Gam beamed with pride. Grog, true to form, just huffed and muttered under his breath, but I could tell he was proud too. We all shared a laugh, each of us grateful for in our own way. Lily rolled her eyes and shook her head, clearly amused but pretending not to care. Suddenly the door in the inn burst open with a loud bang. A strong young woman with bright red hair strode in, dressed in worn leather armor with two battle axes hanging at her sides. Her piercing gaze swept across the room, fury burning in her eyes. "All right," she growled, her voice echoing through the inn. "Where is the Noctare?"